One of our best American poets, Emily Dickinson, has a poem that begins, I'll not recite the whole thing, but it begins by saying, "Tell it slant. Tell it slant." She's talking about the truth in this poem, and Emily has a habit of capitalizing certain words that you wouldn't normally see capitalized, and one of the words she capitalizes is truth, so I take it that Emily is talking about the Lord. But she says, "Tell the truth, but tell it slant." Tell the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies. In other words, come at something from an unexpected angle. The truth is so big, and the truth is so momentous, and the truth has the capacity to bowl us over that sometimes we can't take it full on. And so Emily says, "Tell the truth, but tell it slant." And then she ends up the poem by saying, "Truth must dazzle gradually, or every man be blind." We're going to look at a very unusual miracle from Jesus today. Mark chapter 8 is where you will find it. Toward the end of the chapter, it picks up at verse 22, and so we shall. But it's a very unusual. Jesus is going to throw us a curveball with this miracle because he's going to use a very indirect method. He's going to unravel the truth of what he's saying to us in increments, in steps. And in a gradual way, he's going to be showing us a very big thing. Maybe because if he showed it to us all at once, it would dazzle us and blind us. And that's exactly what's involved. It's a story of blindness. It opens up, verse 22, with some people. It just says they in some of our Bibles. Some people in others. We don't know who these people were. Were they relatives? Were they friends? Who were they? We don't know. There are some of the unsung heroes in the pages of Scripture that just do a walk on and walk right off. But their role is very important. It says that some people, as Jesus comes into a place called Bethsaida, it's a fishing village. In fact, it means house of fish. It's right next to the Sea of Galilee. And as Jesus enters that village, some people, some unnamed people, bring to him a blind man. And they begin to beg. Some of our Bibles say they implore. That's a nice word for beg. They begin to beg and they ask Jesus, "Will you heal this man?" Apparently they've heard reports that he can do such things and has done such things. And so the only question is, will he do it today and will he do it for their friend? And they begin to beg Jesus to heal the man. It's interesting how personally Jesus takes the case of this blind man and his troubles. It says he takes the blind man by the hand. Now the people had been very specific in their request, in their begging. Their request was, "Jesus, we want you to touch him." Because they knew that the touch of Christ is different. It's the same, but it's different. And so as the story unfolds, it's interesting how personally Jesus took this blindness trouble. He listened to the begging. It seems to have gone on the way the sentence is constructed. It goes on for some time as he's making his way into the village. They've confronted him and they continually beg him. He listened to the begging. They know that a personal touch is what's needed. He seems to agree with them. He takes the man by the hand. He takes the man by the hand. He reaches out his hand. Now, why have these people, why have they taken it on themselves to bring the man? Because the man is blind. He can't bring himself. And so Jesus takes the place of the friends and he takes the man by the hand and he leads him outside the village, away from the crowd, away from onlookers, gawkers, spectators. It's a very unusual thing Jesus is doing here. But it will get stranger still. But the personal touch, the man's getting the personal touch. Jesus let him out. Can you see it? The hands that had spun the worlds into space. They took that hand and they led the man to a quiet place away from the crowd. Let him off. And then it says that he applied spit, saliva to the man's non-functional eyes. You can't get much more personal than that. From Jesus' own salivary glands comes the spit that he puts on the man's eyes with his own hands. From Jesus' own mouth it comes. And then as the story unfolds, 2 times at least, he touches the man's eyes with his own hands. And then he's interested to know what the man is experiencing, because this is the only time, I told you, it was a different story. It's an unusual case. Jesus is coming at it slant. He asks for a progress report. He anoints the man's eyes with his own saliva. He puts his hands on his eyes. Can you imagine what that would be like? Take your hand. Take your 2 hands. Put them over your eyes. You're going to immediately notice something. There's going to be a difference between the temperature of your hands and the temperature of your eyes. Your hands will be warmer or cooler then. And that's exactly what it must have been like for that man. Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes. And then, first time, only time, he asked, "How am I doing?" He says, "What do you see?" And the man says, "I see. But what I see is men as trees walking." He could see shapes and shadows, but it wasn't distinct. It wasn't what you could call real sight. But it's interesting how personal Jesus is with this man. What's going on here? Why doesn't he just heal him like he does other times outright? Why does he take him through this 2-stage process where he touches him twice and the healing isn't complete until the second time? Why does he ask for this progress report along the way? Well, in the verses above, verses 11 and 12, he's dealt with a different kind of blindness, a blindness on the part of spiritual leaders, religious leaders, people that have positions, people that should know better. And he characterizes their blindness as having a hardness of heart. They have hard hearts, those leaders too. And then in the verses that follow, he deals with the blindness, this kind of a comic bumbling of his own followers when they get all mixed up about bread and what he's talking about, and it's almost funny. But it's a different kind of blindness there. One is hardness of heart. The other is just the result of just stumbling around and not being careful. Following what he will do here in the healing of this man, because he does heal the man. Following this, the next event is when Jesus asks 2 of his most piercing questions of his followers. He gets them alone, and he asks them a question. He asks them as they're standing in front of a place outside the city of Caesarea Philippi that was called by the local people the gates of hell. There was a huge cave, an opening that went down, they said, to the river of death. It was the gate of hell, and on the face cliff of that opening up above, they had carved niches, and there they had placed all sorts of pagan gods, deformed-looking spirits that they worshipped. They were demonic. Some were pornographic. And they're standing in what they called in front of the gate of hell, Jesus asked the question, "Who do people say that I am?" This will follow the healing of this man, this two-stage healing. Who do people say that I am? And they will give the opinion polls answer. But then Jesus will ask his most piercing question, "Who do you say that I am?" That's a very important question, you know. Who do you say that I am? And they will say, "We think you are the Christ, the Son of the living God." They put the two together. You're the Messiah, you're the King, but you're also God in the flesh. And for the first time they get it, but they only get it in gradual, incremental form. When they begin to follow Jesus, they ask questions like, "Who is he? How's he able to control the storms? How is it he can feed people and raise people and heal people? Who is this that we've attached ourselves to?" They had all sorts of questions about Jesus. But here Jesus, after this miracle with this blind man, he will incrementally let them see who he is and reveal himself to them. His own identity will be revealed in the very same way that he heals this man, in steps, in bits and pieces. You get the answer. Well, Jesus, he asks for this progress report. "How am I doing?" And the man says, "I see men as trees walking." And then Jesus touches him a second time. Touches him again. Have you ever thought about how God is such? He is the kind of being that can be explained to us by becoming a human. Have you ever thought about that? And he comes to us as a human. That's who Jesus is, the God-man, and he perfectly explains who God is. You want to know what God is like? Don't listen to the experts. Don't go read a book. Don't concoct some philosophy. Look at Jesus. He'll tell you exactly what God is like. He'll tell you everything you need to know about who God is, you see? He's divine, and he's human. And he takes that divine human hand and he touches the man the second time. And then he says, "Now what do you see?" And in the words, the lyrics that were penned by Johnny Cash and his wife, June Carter Cash, the man replies, "I can see all things clearly. I can see all things clearly. I can see all things clearly. I've begun to see. I've begun to see." Well, that's the story. But how do we answer something like that? Look at how the man answered. Jesus asked him the first time, "What do you see?" And he said, I see men as trees walking. And I'm sure that this man, he's gone a long time, we don't know, maybe decades, unable to see the result of an injury or a disease or something. And he must surely be staggered that now he can see something. He can see men as trees walking. He can see shapes. He can see light where before it was pitch dark. And he's excited. And it seems staggering on his end. But it's hardly what it should be, what it could be. I see men as trees walking. I can see something. There's so many people that are like that are content to experience a little reality in God, that are content to get a little glimpse of Jesus, to know a little bit about life change, and then stop. and say that's good enough. But it's half a healing. We settle sometimes, and we imagine that what little bit I have is good enough. And that's why Jesus asked the question, how do you see? Do you see anything? He's asking because, and this is the most intriguing part of the whole story, he's asking for a very specific reason. My father was a World War II combat veteran. He had been part of a unit that came behind Patton's army as it cut a swath across France and into Germany. And his unit would go from town to town, liberating the towns, making sure that all of the enemy were driven out, and most especially snipers that were left behind. And he didn't talk a great deal about it. In fact, with almost nobody did he talk about those experiences at all, but he told me 3 or 4 or 5 things, enough to know that he had experienced some chilling things. I remember when I was about 14, I had a big sheath knife that he'd given me. We were out in the garage, just he and I, and he closed the door. He shut the big door. And he said, I want to show you something. And he showed me how you kill a person with a knife in such a way that they don't make a sound. I thought, what an unusual thing for him to show me. It wasn't until years later that I realized, oh my God, he'd done that. But one of their assignments, they were now into Germany, and there was a village that needed to be liberated, but they knew that there were pockets of enemy resistance there. Not many, but enough. And so there was a house, a structure that they were to take. There was some enemy in there. And they got up next to the house, and they were getting ready to go in and get rid of those guys, when somebody shot a projectile, a missile of some kind, into the house. He and his guys weren't expecting it. They saw it go in, and he put his back against the outside wall, and there was an explosion, and they didn't need to go in after that. But he realized that he could not hear out of his left ear. And over the next few weeks, he lost sight in his left eye. Never regained it. He went home. He never really did anything about it. He just figured, well, that's the price of doing business. I will tell you this, though, he was not a lot of fun to drive with, because he always had his left turn signal on, always. I mean, he drove with it on. And that he could never understand why people got upset and would yell at him, and he would get violent with them. And it was, Pop, you can't see, you can't hear. That's why you're leaving it on. He never understood that. But he never did anything about it. He was stone blind in that eye until the last few months of his life, when he realized he had cancer, and for the first time he cashed in on his benefits. And they took great care of him, the VA did, and they would pick him up, and in some conversation he let it slip that he didn't have eyesight, and it was from a combat wound. It was from the concussion of the shell. Nothing had hit him. It was just the blast had destroyed his eyesight. And so they investigated and they tested him, and they did some procedure to where for the last few months of his life he could see shadows and he could see light. After decades, from the time he was a young man and now he's an old man, he hadn't been able to see, and he was thrilled. I remember when he called me and he said, guess what? He said, I can see shadows now. Big deal. But he was still functionally, legally blind. Jesus asked that question, do you see anything of us? Why does he ask that? To show you that you may also be functionally blind. You know a little bit, you've seen a little bit, you've tasted something of the things of God, but don't satisfy yourself that that's all there is. you're still really blind. This man said, I see men as trees walking. And he was thrilled with being able to see men as trees walking. But he couldn't have navigated life like that. Not in such a state. We get to know Jesus a bit. A little bit. We get some insight and we get thrilled over that. We have an occasional quickening in our spirit maybe. And because it's not darkness, it's wonderful, and it is, but we think that's it. And we stop there. A little bit of Jesus is all I need. And we're so like the little girl in the mud puddle who's offered 2 weeks at the coast, vacation at the ocean, but she says no because she can't imagine what the ocean is like, and so she's satisfied with her mud puddle. There's so much more. He's asking because we may be functionally blind and think we've got it all. He's asking because I think I can see. I think this is sight. I think I can see. There was a man that gave me some really good advice once. He's gone now. His name was Chuck McGough. He was my trainer. And he used to tell me all the time, and I think his words have saved me from even greater arrogance than I normally walk around with. He used to say all the time, it doesn't matter how good you get, there's always somebody better. And that's true. There's always somebody better. I think I can see. I think I've got a handle on the things of God. I think I know how to live as a good Christian, but I really can't see. I got the hang of this thing. I'm close enough to God. I've got all I need. No, 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 and again, no. It's not like you should be. It's not like you could be. I only think I can see. Jesus is asking the question, do you see anything? Because there's so much more to see. There's so much more to see. It says in this story that Jesus touches him a second time and the man's sight was restored. And that is a missing puzzle piece in this story, if you look at it carefully. This is why I tell you to read slowly. Where it says his sight was restored, that's a missing part of the story, and it tells you why a blind man even knew about trees and knew what walking looked like. Because apparently at one time he had had sight and lost it. Because now it's restored. It was restored, and it's restored in such a way that he saw everything. Everything. Crystal clear. It's beautiful to see everything, isn't it? You know, you think about your eye. What a marvel is the human eye. The human eye can only be explained as something that is an irreducible complexity. In other words, the component parts that make it all work, that all work together, could not have developed on their own. They wouldn't have made any sense. But the iris and the pupil and the optic nerve and the teeny tiny muscles that send the impulses and all the rest, it all had to come together at the same time or it wouldn't have come together at all. And when you're just looking at your eye and how wonderful it is, you're talking creation, not process. It's complex, but it's complex together. Sight is a beautiful thing. And Jesus is saying there's so much more to see. You may think you know something about life with God, but there's so much more. You may think you've wrung all the good you can out of your Bible. There's so much more. You may think you know how to pray. There's so many more depths in God waiting to be explored. There's so much more to see. As I said, this is the only two-step miracle Jesus was part of. The only time he has a request for a progress report. How am I doing? You come to Jesus the same way, though. You discover your Savior the same way. That's why you should stay at it. Because you haven't arrived yet. That's why you shouldn't give up. That's why you don't dabble in Christianity. That's why you don't jump in and jump out and show up and then don't show up. This is why you don't turn your faith into a hobby. It becomes a passion. This is why you want to be ready for a long obedience in the same direction. Because He reveals Himself in stages. You think you know Him now? You ain't seen nothing yet. He's bigger. He's more beautiful. He's more resourceful. He's more intriguing. He's more fun than you can imagine at this point. He reveals Himself in stages. You think you know Jesus. You think you can get in a conversation and pretty much chart the high points of what He did and what He was about. You can hold a conversation about Jesus probably with anyone, and maybe you can, but there's so much more. There was a young man by the name of John that encountered Jesus while he was working for his father. His father was a commercial fisherman. And young John, he may have been not much more than an older teenager at the time, working for his dad. They'd had an unsuccessful night of fishing. They hadn't done very well. And as the sun came up and the fishing time was over, young John is sitting on the shore and he's mending the nets. They had snagged it on rocks in the bottom and they'd pulled up nothing but trash, and he's picking it out and he's fixing the net when along comes Jesus and says, "Follow me." He could not know where that was going to take him. He could not know that he would become one of the apostles, one of the pillars that this whole thing is built on. He could not know that he would write a gospel, that he would write 3 books at the end, that he would write the Revelation and be used by the Holy Spirit to show the world a new picture of Jesus. He couldn't know that. But he followed Jesus for 3.5 years, and he watched him heal and fix and encourage and raise from the dead and feed, and he watched him die. He was the only one to get anywhere near the cross on that ugly day. And he heard Jesus say from the cross, "John, take care of my mom." And history says he did until the day she died. She became his mom. He couldn't know all that. He couldn't know it where it would take him. He couldn't know that when an old man, he would be such a threat to the Caesar in Rome that he would be imprisoned on a prison camp island in the ocean. And he could not know that one day, well into his 90s, that he would hear from the Spirit on the Lord's day. And he would turn around after hearing a voice that sounded vaguely familiar from decades ago and see Jesus again. But it wasn't Jesus like he remembered him. It was more. If anybody knew Jesus, if anybody could make a claim to knowing what Jesus was like and what he was about, it would be John, the gospel writer. We rely on him for that. He'd known him as a young man. Now he's an old man. And it's Jesus, but like he's never seen him before. There's more. There's so much more. And he shows us who he is in stages. That's why you don't want to jump in and jump out of this thing. That's why you want to follow him consistently. Because as the years go on, he will show you more and more and more. Against that day when you see him face to face. And then you will know yourself just like you're known. And something will shoot through your body that will cause you to be just like him. When we see him, we'll be like him because we will see him just as he is. I want you to stand with me.